Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Shauna DeLacy Porter, and today we have Megan Routbort, who is the co-founder of The Green Journey. I'm so excited to learn more about you and your nonprofit. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Shauna. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so let's just get right to it. And let's start off with, can you share the journey that led you to start this nonprofit and the motivations behind your work?
Sure. So I started my career in the climate space working as a consultant, mostly focused on how do we transform the energy ecosystem to become more sustainable. And I worked a lot with large corporates, with international agencies during this time. But I really realized that we were missing a part of the climate equation in those spaces, which is the grassroots work on the ground that's being done internationally to further the energy transition. So that led me to create The Green Journey with my co-founder, Thomas Polo. Our mission is to discover and elevate stories of climate action from around the world that don't come into normal conversation.
Ooh, that's so interesting. Yeah, I was going to say, I remember seeing on your website, there was another co-founder. So that's amazing that you guys came together to create this wonderful nonprofit. So then my next question for you is just, what are some major obstacles that you've encountered kind of in the early stages of your organization? And then how did you address them?
Yes, for sure. So the biggest obstacle we face is that climate and climate change are just such a broad topic, and it's very easy to lose people on climate conversation quickly. Oftentimes, you'll talk about solar energy, and then someone will want to talk about recycling, and then you'll talk about electric vehicles, and everything becomes so overwhelming that the sheer amount of information becomes a barrier to action. Our goal was to make climate information simple and easy to understand through human stories. But we actually faced this barrier of trying to communicate too much at the beginning, right? So the exact problem that we set out to solve ended up coming back on our shoulders.
Right. Yeah, but I totally love how you kind of said like you wanted to simplify it because it is so much. There is so much to that whole topic, like climate change, electric cars, recycling, and then you get people going and you're like, no, we want to have a dialogue about this, but sometimes it can become overwhelming.
Yes, exactly. And I think for us, one of the things that really helped us be successful so far is focusing on one thing at a time, right? We love to say that not everybody has to do everything, but everyone has to do something. And so for us, strategically, a big part of that shift was saying, okay, this story, we're just going to focus on nature regeneration, or this story, we're just going to focus on wind power. And that helps us communicate with our audience in a more succinct way as well.
Yes, I love that. And I remember I heard a quote one time that said like, there's that quote, it's like, put one foot in front of the other. Someone told me it was like, even if it's a baby step, like even if it's just the smallest thing, it still is a step and it gets you to your destination. And that's kind of how you saying that reminded me, like, if you're doing something, even if it's small, it still can make the biggest impact when we all do it together.
Exactly.
So that's just wonderful. Can you describe a particular rewarding experience or achievement that your organization has had?
Yeah, for sure. So one thing that is important to understand about The Green Journey is that we set the goal to walk the walk on climate storytelling. And there's a lot of journalistic organizations out there that do what we call parachute journalism, which is kind of where you go in, you tell a story, and you go out without really embedding in the community. Our goal is to do the opposite of that, right? So when we do a story or when we travel, we really make an effort to get in deep on the ground with the community, spend more than just a few hours, and understand the full context. So one of our biggest success stories is that this year we rode our bicycles from Venice to Athens to tell climate stories on the way. Yeah.
That's
and
awesome.
we do that because we want to show people that it's possible to travel in a low carbon way. And then we also believe that doing these stories on the ground, having that experience, it brings you into new types of conversation. And so specifically the objective of that journey was to go visit the Wild River National Park in Albania called the Vjosa. And you might have seen it online. It was really popular, actually, March of 2023.
Yeah.
It's an incredible river. Patagonia helped protect it. Leo DiCaprio even posted about it on Instagram.
Mhm.
We had the theory, though, that there was more to that story, right, than just the celebrity piece. And so we rode our bicycles to one of these villages that would have been flooded if the river had been dammed. And we spent a couple days on the ground with the community, doing interviews, telling stories, talking to the people who had lived in that village for decades. And what was really amazing about that experience for me was we rode our bicycles there, and we had so many people in the village say, you guys are the only people who have ever ridden bikes into this village, because it was in the mountains and it was pretty remote. And to sort of be able to tell people, right, that like their work and their village was so important that we rode, 1,000 kilometers from Italy to get there, that made a really unique story and was a really proud accomplishment for us.
Yes, I mean, that I just got like chills even hearing that, because not only did you do something so big, but you also made such a big impact on that community to, show them like people do care. We care. There are people out there more than just this celebrity. Like there are people, and also engaging with people along the way, I know is so much more beneficial because it's personal. It's
Yeah.
not, you're not just reading something online or seeing a video. You get to actually engage with that human being, and it's so important.
Right. And one of the big theses behind our nonprofit, behind the Green Journey, is that climate is a topic that more people are thinking about than you realize, right? 76% of Americans are concerned about climate change, according to Yale Climate Communications. But much fewer are talking about it, and even fewer are taking action. So our thesis is that by going on adventures and using exploration and connection with nature as an avenue to then talk about climate action, that's really kind of the central point behind why we go on these crazy trips, right? It's not because we're so tough or we want to do such a crazy thing. It's more because we know that you need that hook, right, to get people interested.
Yes, yes. I totally agree. It's kind of like when you read a story, that hook, that first line, you want to bring them in, and that's how you do it. And that's how
Exactly
you guys
that.
are doing it. Yes.
It's
So
that
that's
you have to have a hook.
yes, yes, yes. I love that. So what are some core values of your organization, and kind of how do you ensure that they're integrated into your operations and activities?
Yeah, for sure. So we really have two core values at the Green Journey. One of them is centering diverse voices. And for us, that is so important in terms of the mission we fulfill, because there are more people working on climate out there than just, like I said, Leo DiCaprio and Greta Thunberg.
Yeah.
It takes a village to work on climate issues, but so many voices don't get centered in this story, right? And in particular, local voices, local people who are just living their lives and trying to survive the climate disasters, right, that are taking place. So that really manifests in how we choose our stories. We source our stories from grassroots organizations. We source a lot of our stories from actually asking around in communities. And we always make sure to center diverse voices in our storytelling. The second value that is really core to what we do is what I call walking that walk of climate action. And that means for us, as we're on this around the world trip to tell climate stories, we're not using flights to get from place to place, and we're not using individual gas-powered vehicles. And we're doing this not because we want to create a big accomplishment or because we're against those things point blank, but rather to show people that it is possible to adjust your lifestyle and adjust your tactics in order to tell a story. And where I come from with that is I would never say, if someone needs to visit their family or if they need to do something, right, I would never say don't fly. I would never tell a climate activist to not fly to go to a climate conference. But we're trying to shift that narrative to show that low carbon travel and low carbon adventure can be fun. And maybe next time, instead of, flying for 72 hours to go to a bachelorette party in Vegas, you can go on a hike near your house. And I guarantee you'll have just as much fun.
Yes, yes, I totally agree. I was actually, I have a few friends from India, and they were saying how when they came to the States, we drive everywhere. And I never really realized how much we did drive until they pointed that out to me. And I was like, wow, it must be you can walk places. I have so many areas in my house that are around my house that I just drive to. But now when it's nice out, I walk to them because I'm like, why do I really need to put that? Do I need to pollute there with my gas? If it's, a 5-minute walk, we don't need to do that. And it's, so
yeah, exactly. And that one is, I think also, that's a really systemic issue, right? And we face a unique challenge in the United States because a lot of places are physically not possible to get to without using a more intensive form of transportation. And that's where it sort of becomes this discussion about individual choice versus systemic action. And we really promote systemic action, right? So the solution to what you just described, right, everyone driving, is asking politicians and advocating for better public transport, right? Or recently we took a Greyhound from Miami to Houston, which was honestly, a tough experience. Like, we've taken many, many 30-hour bus rides before on this trip, but the Greyhound was uniquely challenging in that, they were really not treating the riders correctly. It was really, really slow, and there's no other option in the United States. There's no high-speed rail. And that's the kind of thing that we're trying to bring attention to at the Green Journey and start that conversation. What would it look like if you had a train that went from Florida to Texas?
Exactly, which I love because it really opens that pathway to, new possibilities and new options that haven't really been talked about before.
Exactly. And that's the best thing you can do, is talk about it, right, when it comes to climate.
So thank you for that. How do you measure success for not only yourself, but the organization? Facing challenges and uncertainties is a part of leading a nonprofit, of course, but how do you manage these moments?
Yeah, that's the thing that's interesting about the nonprofit space, right? Because you don't measure success necessarily in dollars raised or dollars deployed. It's not like a for-profit organization, which is similar to where I used to work, where everything can be tied back to a dollar value. So we really like to measure our success in terms of overall impressions, right? So people that we're able to touch across social media, across Substack, the number of people that are reading our stories, that's one of the most important things to us, right? And when we have 10Ks of views, 100Ks of views across platforms, it makes me really excited because I can then say, okay, these person read our story and they know now about this climate action that they didn't hear of before. For ourselves, I think for me and my co-founder, we like to kind of measure our personal development in this journey of just how much we're learning about climate that we didn't know before. And, I worked in the solar space. I was a pretty deep expert in solar panels and inverters and all of these things, but I didn't know anything about nature regeneration or hydrogen or public transport, really. Like, those weren't my areas of expertise. And now I can look and I can say, after 10 months of running this nonprofit, we have this greater expertise, which then makes us able to work better across disciplines.
Right, exactly. Like, the more you know, the more you can talk about it and explain to people and kind of get that conversation going.
Yeah, exactly.
Beautiful. So is there a setback or a apparent failure your organization experienced that ultimately led to a valuable lesson or, an unexpected success from that?
Yeah. So one of the challenges of existing in the nonprofit space is a lot of the fundraising is done through grant applications. And when we started the nonprofit, went through a lot of iterations of applying for grants. And I'm talking like rejection after rejection, which can be really frustrating, right? Yes. And, the grant making space is very competitive, and it's kind of similar, right, to raising for a startup in the sense that there's more people who want funding than there is funding to go around.
Right. Yeah.
So I think for like the first 6 months of opening the nonprofit, we did not have any grant applications that were successful. And this was just us, sitting at the computer day after day, not really balancing and enjoying the travel with this work that we had to do behind the scenes to raise funding. But after 9 months of work, so we had kind of 6 months of no's and then a process of, okay, maybe, we got our first grant application in and successful, which was a huge success for us, right? Because it was just this boost that said, okay, like, you can actually do this, right? You can actually have that external validation for your efforts. And that is going to fund a series that we're doing on intergenerational climate action. So that's a cool story. It's about both young kids and then older folks who are working across climate. And we're just so excited about this, right? Because it's going to unlock new doors for us and help us get our stories out there, right? Which is so validating. So the lesson from that, right, when it comes to fundraising, whether it's for profit or nonprofit, is perseverance, right? Because there will be someone out there that clicks with your mission.
Yeah, I remember there's a quote that goes like, rejection is redirection. And I kind of always think of that in moments when I hear no, or, get whatever it might be, I'm like, okay, maybe this is protecting me to get redirected somewhere even better. And it kind of pushes you even further. So then when you have that moment, you savor it so much more.
Yes, exactly. I had the biggest smile on my face when we got that news. And actually what was funny about it was a grant that we had previously been rejected for. And then they wrote us back and they said, hey, we found more funding, and we want you guys, right? So that was
amazing.
It was amazing because it was so out of my mind, right? When we got that news.
Yes, it's kind of like, I feel like things work out that way sometimes, like all of a sudden you're like, okay, no. And then you're like, wait a minute, what? And it's
exactly.
Yes, it's, oh my God. Well, congratulations on that. And I'm so excited to watch that grow. So beautiful. What strategies do you employ to encourage and, encourage innovation and creative thinking within your team? Because, I'm sure it's kind of hard when you have all those no's and no's and no's. So what do you do?
Yeah, great question. We are strategy freaks, I would say. We do a lot of strategy sessions, I think more than you would expect for a nonprofit maybe. And I don't know, right? But it comes from our background, right? We really were working in strategy consulting before this. And so I would say every 2 weeks, we have a strategy session. And that means literally getting out our notebooks, writing down what's worked well so far, what hasn't worked well so far, and redefining the goals and the metrics for the next 2 weeks ahead, and then constantly iterating on that, right? And that has led us to really helpful changes of focus. I would say at the beginning of our journey, we were thinking in these spans of 2-week sprints, and we had this mindset that everything we said needed to be done in those 2 weeks. But since we've started these strategy sessions, we now have kind of a longer time horizon, which is what I mean when I say we've been able to focus on longer term projects, right? So now we're moving our thinking towards planning what we're going to do in July and August and September. And that gives us a longer lead time to make deeper, lasting impact.
Yes, I love that. I love that. Yeah, because sometimes it's kind of like there's so many ideas at once and it can get overwhelming. And then when you kind of talk it out with someone and okay, this can be for July, this can be for August, this can be for September, it helps so much instead of just being like, we have all these ideas up here, and they're all wonderful. Where do we start? And so, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And then I guess one other thing that I just forgot to mention is, so it's me and Polo are the co-founders, but then we have a team that works with us. And the biggest thing we do to encourage creativity for them is letting them set the direction. We always say, this is a nonprofit, right? We can't really pay you much. You're doing this because you care about this topic. And we say, so therefore it has to be valuable to you, right? What you do has to be work that gives you joy and gives you energy. And that has been really effective in getting people in our community to not only practice using their skills in a climate space, but also develop themselves personally for building their broader career trajectory.
Yes. It's kind of like that saying, teamwork makes the dream work, right? When you all get to work together and you not only work together, but support each other individually, that you guys flourish, as a team. So.
Yeah. And I think being a good leader, it's not about making sure your goals are accomplished at the end of the day. I think it's about making sure your team's goals are accomplished first and foremost.
Yes. Because you guys are one. There was a quote one time I read, it said, many in body, but one in mind. There could be a lot of you, but if you're working for the same goal, like you guys are, you can achieve so much.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's fast forward to the future, right? So what is your vision for the future of this organization and kind of how do you plan to achieve it?
Yeah, great. So first and foremost, for the first iteration of this nonprofit, we've been focused on short form storytelling. So we've really been focused on writing articles, building a community, building some social media presence. But now we're realizing we want to engage more deeply with our audience, right? And we want to tell climate stories that are more complex and take more time and actually motivate people towards a definitive action, right? Versus saying, okay, this is what you can do to recycle. This is what you can do to travel low carbon. We're really interested, once again, in the solar space, which is where I come from. So coming up, we're going to be moving into documentary filmmaking, and we're going to use documentary filmmaking as an avenue to touch more people on climate, once again, with this thesis of adventure and travel. Yeah. So if all goes well, this summer, we're going to be riding solar-powered bicycles across the United States. And on the way, stopping and visiting these people to tell stories, and then also focusing on youth outreach, right? So it's a really critical moment where we face a 1 million person talent gap in the clean energy space. We need to motivate young people to recognize that these are the careers of the future. And so our theory is like, we're going to ride up to college campuses on solar bikes. It sparks conversation about solar power. And then we will deliver lectures and presentations about how this is a really promising career field in the future.
Wow, I love that. That's wonderful because, they always say like the youth is our future, but it is true. They are our future, and we want them to have good lives. And so we have to teach them kind of what is going on and educate them about what the future can hold and what it is right now. And so,
yeah, and I think young people know, right? Young people are some of the most engaged demographic on climate that we've noticed in our research. But what our obligation is as members of millennials, as Gen X, as boomers, our obligation is to give them the tools, right? Because they have the awareness, but we need to give them the tools because, they're younger, they are still in the process of getting their education.
Right.
And that's really what this is about. It's not about telling them, go get a job in clean energy. It's about saying, you should work in clean energy and here's how you can do it. And here's how we can support you through that.
Yeah. Yep. And that the key word is like support. Cause so a lot of kids, a lot of youth are like, young kids are like, kind of like, well, where do I start? And you're like, we're here to help. We're here to help.
Exactly. So. And like I said, right, it's a confusing space, which is the whole point of this organization existing, is to kind of cut through the noise.
Well, that's wonderful. And I'm so excited to just continue watching it grow and, speaking with, future generations kind of about this nonprofit.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So how does your organization approach and manage risks? Because I'm sure that's comes up quite a bit.
Yeah. So I think one of our biggest risks is communications risk, right? And that's because there's a lot of climate disinformation around there. And it can quickly be easy to fall into kind of traps of being overly political. So we have a really rigorous process with which we review all of our communications. We have super high journalistic standards that we hold ourselves to with our team in terms of reporting. And I think a big thing that we do, which is sort of what's different from other journalists, is we don't have this gotcha approach, right? We always vet all of our stories with the subject a final time before we publish them. And that's kind of a shift, right, from like the New York Times model or the Wall Street Journal model. But our thesis is like, we're not out here to get you or to point out that you had a failing or to expose you, right? We're out here to get information out about good and positive change that's going on in the world. And that's something that is done through collaboration. So I would say having that collaborative process is one of our biggest risk managements. And then, one of the funny things, right, is like, we're taking some physical risks by being out here traveling and going to different countries and biking and sailing. And so we're always super rigorous with insurance and all of that stuff. But it's kind of, that's more of the travel component, I would say.
Right. Like the logistics, that kind of, all that fun stuff is.
Yeah, exactly. So it's part of everything, right?
Right. Got to have it. So my next question for you is, could you describe your leadership approach and kind of how you foster a positive and effective organizational, I'm going to can't say this word right now, effective organizational culture?
Yeah. So I think the most important thing is to have collaborative leadership and servant leadership. And so we run a very non-hierarchical organization, right? We are 2 founders and then about 14 members right now. And it is never a question of to-do lists or got yous or, OKRs that people are missing. It's more a question of, how do we get this story out into the world? And how do we make sure people are working on what gives them passion, right? So with my co-founder, even sometimes we'll pass the ball between each other or we'll pass the ball with team members. And our theory is that by passing the ball back and forth in a structured and controlled environment, you can then create a better product versus one person writing something and then one person reviewing. you lose that creative energy, right, that you
Yes,
get
I
when
agree.
you're passing things back and forth.
Yes.
And what's great about our organization is because we are so mission driven on climate, people want to work on it, right? So we're lucky, I think, in that way that this project has been born from passion, and passion is a great motivator. I think if I was running something that wasn't focused on like what is literally the biggest challenge of our time, then there might be more of a sense of, oh, maybe I can slack off or I can relax, but people feel very motivated about this topic. And so I feel very
Yes.
lucky to be working on this
Yes,
topic.
when I'm passionate about something, I kind of work a little bit harder because I love it and I want to do so good because I care so much about it. So that is a big key component. And you passing the ball to you kind of like, your co-founder and the other teammates kind of really amps that passion up. Because then they're like, oh yes, it's my turn. I get to show all the passion
Yes,
I have.
exactly. And I think like in leadership, people are sometimes like, oh, passing the ball isn't good, right? Everyone needs to have their ownership for their end deliverable,
Mhm.
like end to end. And I mean, I've worked in organizations like that before. And I think that works in some organizations.
Right.
Like certainly if you're a product manager or if you're in science, or back when I was in solar, if you're in engineering, right, you need the engineer to focus on
Mhm.
that widget. But in storytelling and in creative industry, which is what this is, it's very different, right?
Yes.
Creativity, you don't want to be creative in a vacuum.
Yes, exactly. It's a whole different world, but it's a fun one.
Yeah, exactly.
So can you kind of tell me how has the organization grown or changed since the beginning? I'm sure there was a lot of changes from where it started to where it is today. So kind of give me a rundown on that.
Yeah. So when the organization started, we were trying to do too much, which I think is like the case of so many organizations.
Yep.
We sort of said we're going to do a story in every single country. We're going to have, a 1 week turnaround for every piece of content. We're really going to go broad, right? We had this idea of we can go really broad.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, our focus has narrowed to sort of say, we're going to focus on 10 climate stories per continent and go really deep and have that approach that is not parachute journalism, right? Have that approach that is really embedded journalism. So I think that's one of the biggest ways that we've changed focus. And then the other one I think I mentioned a little bit earlier is that we've really changed the focus to be from shorter form to focusing more on long form communications.
Yes.
And the goal behind that, right, is to leave like a lasting legacy. So one of the things that we realized pretty quickly about the social media world is that it's just so go, 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 buzz, 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 onto the next thing. But the pieces of content that have really impacted us, An Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore, Free Solo by Alex Honnold, all these things that are longer form content that force you to sit with the story, that's where we want to make an impact now.
Yeah. I totally get that. It's like quality over quantity. You could always produce so much, but if you have this quality video or story, it hits so much different and it just leaves a much longer lasting impact on someone.
Yeah, exactly.
So then, can share it with someone else and then leaves along and, so it's like the snowball effect kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So, speaking of like Al Gore and all of them, has there been a book or a mentor or maybe a significant event that kind of deeply influenced you or deeply influenced your approach to leading your nonprofit?
That's a great question. So I would say in terms of who influenced my leadership style the most, there's a woman named Julia Sicardo who works at the Department of Energy, and she very much had this servant leadership mindset. And she was one of my leaders early on in my career and really encouraged me to be an emotionally intelligent leader. I once worked on a project with her. It was a burner. And after the burner project, she sent everyone sleep masks, right? Like that kind of small gesture, really, when you recognition that the team is working hard, that's a big thing that has influenced us. I think another thing that's in terms of like a mentor that I didn't know personally, right, but someone who really influenced me in the climate movement was Dr. Catherine Hayhoe. She is a professor at Texas Tech University and a climate scientist. And she shares positive climate news. And her thesis is really the best thing you can do about climate change is talk about it. And that is kind of what was one of the impetus, sorry, I'm like, but it was one of the impetus for us starting the Green Journey was to get people to talk about climate change.
I love that. I love that. And I love that you guys are doing, because you kind of, it's like New York Times, whatever. We were talking about that earlier. And I love that you guys are always like positive about it, because there's could be so much negative, like, look what happened today in the world, but, showing people also the positive of climate and kind of like how we can help our mother nature, is really wonderful.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because we've moved sort of past the era of climate denialism. Like I
Mhm.
said, the majority of Americans now recognize that climate change is happening. We're now in the era of climate doomerism, where people are saying, okay, it's happening, but what can I do about it? Nothing.
Right.
That's not true. And we're out here to show you what you can do about it.
Yep, I love that. So, in your view, what are some essential skills that are needed to lead a successful nonprofit organization?
Yeah, so you have to be organized, right? That's one of the basic things, because you have a lot of forms to deal with and you have a lot of stakeholders to manage, and you have this over a long-term time horizon, right? So organization is key. I think passion is also key, right? Because it's a nonprofit, you can't be motivated by financial returns and retiring on your sailboat. Like, you have to have a
Mm,
passion for what you're doing, which is
mm,
so key. And honestly, you need passion in for-profit too, but like even bigger, right, for
right.
nonprofit. Another big thing is that mindset of servant leadership, right? Because people are coming to work with you not because they're looking to make $1 million, but because they're looking to make a change in the world. And it is your obligation as a servant leader to be there for them, to help them make that change. And then I think finally is just like a spirit of curiosity, which is, once again, it's helpful for any founder. But if you stay curious, you will keep developing and keep growing and keep expanding the edges of your horizon.
Yes, I totally agree. So, a little bit more about kind of the nonprofit. What are the primary services or programs programs your organization offers right now?
Yeah, so the two pillars are communications and education. Communications, in that we offer the stories and we share these stories and we help people with climate communications. We raise the bar and raise awareness for these other nonprofit organizations that we've met with on our way. Education is where we do climate education. We educate people about low carbon travel. We educate people about solar power. We educate people about how they can make a change in the world. So right now we just focus on communications and education. I think someday we might move into advocacy a bit more, where we actually offer pathways to change, and we
Mm,
work on consulting with other NGOs, or we have specific targets that we help people progress towards. But for now, we're just sort of staying in the education and communication space, because we're not trying to be partisan in how we talk about climate. Is also important to recognize that.
right. I totally understand. And then I guess, just my last question for you is, what advice would you offer to someone who's considering to start their own nonprofit organization, or, what advice you wish you knew, right, before starting this nonprofit?
Yeah, great question. So I think the biggest piece of advice I would have is make sure that you want to start a nonprofit versus does something already exist that what you want to do. And in our case, there was nothing out there like us, right? There was
Mm,
no other communications media organization that was also doing this walking the walk on low carbon travel, right? There was no one else out there doing like climate exploration, is what we call
right.
it. But we had to really study and make sure that that was the case. Because let's say, for example, you want to work on deploying solar panels in schools. There's amazing existing organizations like that with the Honnold Foundation. There are ways to get involved beyond starting your own thing, because
Mm,
starting your own thing, it's really hard, right? And I won't joke about that. And it's good to get early experience helping out on boards of other nonprofits, volunteering for other nonprofits. So doing that market research, right? Which, I mean, it's kind of the same thing, honestly, for a for-profit organization. You don't want to get out there and start a baby Uber, because Uber already exists, Lyft already
right.
exists, right? You have to have that original idea. Um, and then I guess the final piece of advice, right, is like, don't be afraid of change. So in the 10 months that we've been on the ground, our mission has evolved so much. We're learning new things every day, and to the point, right, where, we'll go back and we'll probably change our mission statement and edit our mission statement and refine and tweak and all of this stuff. And that's just part of the journey, right? Like there's a saying that if your startup hasn't changed, 50 times since you started it, it's not a real startup, right? So,
right. You're always learning and growing and evolving and becoming better and, like tweaking those things so you can become the best nonprofit or company or organization that you can be.
Yes, exactly. And it's really identifying that gap in the market, gap in the world. Where is that gap where you can make the most difference? And then if that gap changes over time, change with it.
Right. Well, thank you so much for, speaking with me today. And it was so great to meet with you and learn more about the green journey and to hear that wonderful advice that you gave. So just thank you so much. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. And I will see everyone next time.
Thank you so much. It was great to talk, Shauna. Cheers. Bye. Bye.